$50 million says you won't do it. Lysander Sterling's champagne glass froze halfway to his lips. The Charleston Museum's annual art auction buzzed around them, but the words from Octavius Harrington cut through the noise like a blade. "You're drunk, Octavius." Lysander set down his glass on the marble pedestal beside a Monet that would sell for more than most people earned in a lifetime. Cassius Harrington stepped closer, his designer suit unable to hide the desperation in his eyes. "My brother's dead serious, Sterling. 50 million against your company." Lysander studied the brothers who had once been Charleston's golden boys. Their family's shipping empire had crumbled 3 years ago, though they still maintained appearances at events like this. What he hadn't known until recently was how deeply they'd fallen into illegal gambling circuits. "What exactly are you proposing?" Lysander's voice carried the authority of someone who'd inherited sterling real estate development at 28 and tripled its value in 4 years. Octavius smiled, but sweat beaded on his forehead. "Simple challenge. You marry the first homeless woman you find on the street and stay married for exactly 1 year. If you complete the year, we pay you 50 million. If you don't, you sign over sterling real estate to us." The absurdity should have made Lysander laugh. Instead, he found himself intrigued. "Why would I risk my life's work on something so ridiculous?" "Because you've never backed down from a challenge," Cassius said. "Remember the yacht race in Monaco? The poker game in Vegas? You thrive on impossible odds." Lysander's reputation for accepting outrageous bets was well established among Charleston's elite. He'd won a racehorse by swimming across Charleston Harbor in December. He'd acquired a tech startup by spending a week living in downtown homeless shelters. Each victory had added to both his fortune and his legend. "There's a difference between calculated risks and stupidity," Lysander said. "Is there?" Octavius pulled out his phone, showing bank statements. "We're prepared to put 50 million in escrow tonight. Are you prepared to prove you're still the man who never says no?" The auction continued around them. Wealthy patrons bid on paintings while servers offered champagne and caviar. This world of privilege and power had shaped Lysander since birth, but lately it felt increasingly hollow. "What's the real game here?" Lysander asked. "You don't have 50 million to lose." The brothers exchanged glances. Cassius spoke first. "We have investors who believe sterling real estate is undervalued. They're willing to back us." Lysander knew better. The Harrington brothers had been spotted at underground gambling houses in Savannah and Atlanta. Their desperation suggested they owed money to people who didn't accept late payments gracefully. 1 year of marriage to a homeless woman, Lysander repeated. "What defines completion? What prevents me from simply paying her to disappear after signing papers?" "You must live together as husband and wife," Octavius said. "Social events, public appearances, the works. Your reputation demands authenticity. And if she leaves me, then you forfeit," Cassius said quickly. "The marriage must be her choice to maintain." Lysander considered the proposal. Sterling real estate was worth far more than 50 million, but losing it would destroy everything his grandfather had built. On the other hand, the company practically ran itself now. His executive team handled daily operations while he focused on major acquisitions. "I assume you have legal documents prepared?" Octavius produced a folder from his jacket. "Everything's ready for signatures. The marriage must occur within 48 hours, and the year begins immediately afterward." Lysander scanned the contract. The language was precise, clearly written by expensive attorneys. Every contingency seemed covered, every loophole sealed. "Why homeless specifically?" he asked. "Because it's humiliating," Cassius said bluntly. "Because it's the one thing Lysander Sterling would never voluntarily do. Because it proves you're not untouchable." The honest answer surprised Lysander more than the bet itself. These men weren't just gambling for money. They were gambling for the satisfaction of watching Charleston's most eligible bachelor brought low. 24 hours to find and marry her, Lysander said. "Not 48. "Agreed. And I choose the officiant and location." "Fine." Lysander picked up his pen. The rational part of his mind screamed warnings, but the part that had driven him to every previous victory whispered that this could be his greatest triumph yet. He signed his name with the same bold strokes he used on billion-dollar contracts. "Gentlemen," he said, handing back the documents, "you just made the worst bet of your lives." As the brothers walked away, Lysander felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that came with impossible challenges. He had less than 24 hours to find a wife among Charleston's homeless population, convince her to marry him, and begin a year-long performance that would either cost him everything or add another legendary chapter to his reputation. What he didn't know was that his future wife was already watching him from across the room. Evangeline Fairchild had been watching Lysander Sterling for 3 months. She knew his morning routine. Coffee at Brennan's Bakery at 7:15, always black, always with the Wall Street Journal. She knew he preferred the back corner table where he could see both entrances. She knew he tipped exactly 20% and never made small talk with servers. Tonight, crouched in the alley behind King Street, she knew he would come looking for his homeless bride. The museum gala had ended 20 minutes ago. Through her network of street contacts, she'd learned about the bet within an hour of it being made. Marcus, who collected cans near the museum's loading dock, had overheard enough to piece together the story. Evangeline adjusted the torn jacket she'd carefully distressed over weeks of preparation. Her appearance was a masterpiece of calculated desperation. Dirt strategically placed, hair matted but not greasy enough to suggest serious illness, clothes worn but not so damaged as to indicate mental instability. She needed to look like someone who had fallen on hard times, not someone who belonged on the streets permanently. The irony wasn't lost on her. Lysander Sterling was about to propose to the one person in Charleston who had more reason to destroy him than anyone else alive. Footsteps echoed from King Street. 2 sets, moving with purpose. Evangeline recognized Lysander's confident stride even before she saw him round the corner with another man she didn't recognize. "This is insane," the stranger was saying. "You're really going to marry some random homeless woman because of a stupid bet?" "The bet isn't stupid if I win," Lysander replied. "And I always win." Evangeline had positioned herself perfectly, close enough to the street lamp to be visible, far enough into the alley to seem like she was trying to hide. She sat against the brick wall, knees drawn up, a paper bag beside her containing props, an empty vodka bottle, some crumpled receipts, a photo of people she'd never met but claimed as lost family. "There," Lysander said, stopping 10 feet away. "That one." The stranger stepped closer to Evangeline. "Miss, are you all right?" Evangeline looked up slowly, letting her eyes take a moment to focus. She'd practiced this expression in mirrors for weeks. Vulnerable but not broken, desperate but not dangerous. "I'm fine," she said, her voice carrying just the right amount of defeat. "Just resting." Lysander studied her with the same intensity he probably used to evaluate real estate investments. "What's your name?" "Eva." She'd chosen the nickname carefully, close enough to her real name that she wouldn't hesitate when responding, different enough to maintain her cover. "Eva, I have an unusual proposition for you. I don't do that kind of work." The response came out sharper than intended, showing a flash of the real Evangeline beneath the performance. "Not that," Lysander said quickly. "I'm talking about marriage." The stranger made a choking sound. "Lysander, maybe we should. Give us a moment, Derek." Derek retreated toward the street, shaking his head and muttering under his breath. Lysander sat down on an empty crate nearby, bringing himself closer to Evangeline's eye level. The gesture surprised her. She'd expected him to remain standing, to use his height and position to establish dominance. "I know this sounds crazy," he began, "but I need a wife for exactly 1 year. In exchange, I'll provide you with housing, food, healthcare, and $50,000 when the year ends." Evangeline let silence stretch between them. In that silence, she calculated how many times she'd imagined this moment, how many scenarios she'd run through in her mind. None of them had included him sitting down. None had included him speaking to her like she was a person rather than a problem to solve. "Why me?" she asked. "Honestly, because you're the first homeless woman I found, and I have 18 hours to get married." The blunt truth was somehow more compelling than any elaborate story would have been. Evangeline respected directness, even when it came from someone she'd planned to destroy. "What's the catch?" "No catch. We get married tomorrow, live together for a year, then divorce. You get paid. I win my bet. Everyone walks away satisfied." "What kind of bet requires marrying a homeless woman?" Lysander's jaw tightened slightly. "The kind made by idiots who think they can embarrass me." There it was. The pride that had driven 3 generations of Sterling men to make increasingly reckless decisions. The same pride that had led his father to order her kidnapping rather than lose a business deal. I need to think about it, Evangeline said. There's no time to think. I need an answer now. She studied his face in the lamplight. Handsome in the way that came from good genetics and expensive grooming, but there was something else there. A restlessness that suggested he was as trapped by his circumstances as she was by hers. $50,000 and full medical coverage. Yes. And after the year, I never see you again? If that's what you want. Evangeline extended her hand. Deal. When Lysander shook it, his skin was warm and his grip firm. For just a moment, she forgot that she was supposed to hate him. We'll get the license tomorrow morning, he said, standing. The wedding's tomorrow evening. As he walked away with Derek, Evangeline remained in the alley. Phase 1 was complete. In less than 24 hours, she would be Mrs. Lysander Sterling. The real game was about to begin. The Charleston County Courthouse had never hosted a stranger wedding. Evangeline stood in the marble hallway at 8:30 the next morning, wearing a simple white dress Derek had purchased from a boutique on King Street. The fabric was expensive but conservative, chosen to make her look respectable rather than beautiful. She'd scrubbed away 3 months of carefully maintained grime and styled her hair into a neat bun that hid most of its length. Lysander appeared precisely on time, flanked by Derek and a woman Evangeline didn't recognize. Eva, this is Rebecca Martinez, my attorney, Lysander said. She'll serve as our witness. Rebecca looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. Mr. Sterling, I feel obligated to remind you that prenuptial agreements won't be necessary. Lysander cut her off. This is a business arrangement with a defined end date. The ceremony took 12 minutes. Judge Patricia Henley, a family friend who owed the Sterling family several favors, performed the service with professional efficiency and barely concealed bewilderment. She'd known Lysander since he was a child attending charity galas with his parents. Do you, Lysander William Sterling, take Eva to be your lawfully wedded wife? I do. Do you, Eva, take Lysander to be your lawfully wedded husband? Evangeline looked directly into Lysander's eyes. I do. The rings were simple gold bands Derek had picked up from a jewelry store that morning. When Lysander slipped the ring onto her finger, Evangeline felt an unexpected jolt of emotion. This wasn't how she'd imagined her wedding day as a little girl, but it was happening, and for reasons she couldn't explain, it felt more real than she'd expected. You may kiss the bride. The kiss was brief and formal, but Lysander's lips were softer than she'd anticipated. When they separated, she caught something in his expression that looked almost like regret. Congratulations, Judge Henley said, though her tone suggested she thought they'd all lost their minds. Derek drove them to the Sterling mansion in Ansonboro in silence. Evangeline stared out the window at the historic district where she'd grown up, fighting memories of walking these same streets as a child with her father. The Sterling mansion was a massive Greek Revival structure with white columns and perfectly manicured gardens. Evangeline had driven past it countless times during her months of surveillance, but entering as Lysander's wife felt surreal. The staff knows you're my wife, Lysander said as they stood in the foyer. They don't know the circumstances. Mrs. Chin manages the house. Tell her if you need anything. Where will I sleep? The master suite has a sitting room with a couch. We'll make it work. Mrs. Chun appeared as if summoned, a efficient-looking woman in her 50s who examined Evangeline with polite curiosity. Mrs. Sterling, she said, testing the name. Welcome home. Would you like me to show you around? That would be helpful. Thank you. The tour took an hour. The mansion had 14 rooms, 6 bathrooms, and enough antique furniture to stock a museum. Evangeline recognized several pieces that had belonged to her family before the Sterlings acquired them through their various schemes. Dinner was served in a dining room that could seat 20 people. Lysander sat at the head of the table, while Evangeline took the chair to his right. The silence stretched until she couldn't stand it anymore. Do you always eat alone in this enormous room? Usually I eat in my office or not at all. That's depressing. Lysander looked up from his salmon. I'm busy building an empire. Social dining isn't a priority. Even empires need emperors who remember they're human. Something flickered across his face, but he didn't respond. After dinner, they went upstairs to the master suite. The bedroom was larger than most apartments, dominated by a 4-poster bed that looked like it belonged in a palace. I'll take the sitting room, Lysander said, gathering some clothes from his dresser. This is your house. I can sleep on the couch. My wife doesn't sleep on couches. The word wife hung in the air between them. Evangeline wasn't sure if he'd meant it or if it just slipped out. She changed into a nightgown Derek had included with the dress, another conservative choice in pale blue cotton. When she emerged from the bathroom, Lysander was sitting on the edge of the bed, still in his wedding suit, but with his tie loosened. "We should establish some ground rules," he said, "such as, public appearances are mandatory. Private time is private. We maintain separate lives within this arrangement." Evangeline nodded, but as she moved toward the bed, she stumbled slightly on the unfamiliar nightgown. Lysander reached out to steady her, his hand catching her wrist. That's when he saw it. The six-pointed star birthmark on the inside of her wrist, small but unmistakable. Evangeline realized her mistake the instant his grip tightened. "Show me your shoulder," he said quietly. "What? Your left shoulder. Show me." Evangeline's heart hammered against her ribs. She'd been so careful for so long, but the nightgown sleeves were shorter than she'd realized. Lysander's face had gone completely white. "You're dead." "Excuse me. Evangeline Fairchild died 5 years ago. I saw the obituary. I attended the memorial service. The game was over." Evangeline lifted her chin and met his stare directly. "Reports of my death were greatly exaggerated." Lysander stepped backward as if she'd struck him. "Jesus Christ. You're supposed to be dead. Sorry to disappoint you. My father said. The family said you were killed in an accident. Your father lied." The words hit him like physical blows. Evangeline watched him process the implications, saw the exact moment he understood what her presence meant. "You planned this," he whispered. "The bet, finding you in that alley. All of it. Every single detail." "Why?" Evangeline smiled, and for the first time since her return to Charleston, she let him see exactly who she really was. "Because your family destroyed mine. And now it's my turn." Lysander sank into the wingback chair beside the fireplace, his wedding suit wrinkled and his hands shaking slightly. "Tell me what really happened." Evangeline remained standing, her posture straight and defiant. "Which version would you prefer? The one your father told, where I died in a car accident in Atlanta? Or the one where I was sold to human traffickers in Miami?" "That's impossible." "Is it?" Evangeline moved to the window overlooking the garden where she'd played as a child during family visits. "Your father needed my family's waterfront properties for his casino development project. My father refused to sell, so Ambrose Sterling found another way to acquire them." Lysander's voice came out hoarse. "My father doesn't deal with human traffickers. Your father deals with whoever serves his purposes." Evangeline turned back to face him. "I was 21, fresh out of college, working at my father's investment firm. One night, I was leaving the office late, and a van pulled up. 3 men grabbed me off the street. You could have been random victims. With a briefcase containing $50,000 in cash and specific instructions about my delivery location." Evangeline's laugh held no humor. "Nothing random about it." Lysander stood abruptly, pacing to his dresser and back. "Even if what you're saying is true, my father wouldn't. He's not a killer. He didn't need to kill me. Dead daughters generate investigations and police attention. Missing daughters who are presumed dead after their car is found burned out on a highway? Much cleaner." The details hit Lysander like physical blows. He remembered the news coverage 5 years ago, remembered his mother crying at the memorial service, remembered his father's solemn speech about the tragedy of losing such a promising young woman. "How did you escape?" Evangeline's expression hardened. "Does it matter? The point is that I did, and I spent 3 years learning everything I could about your family's business practices. The property deals, the shell companies, the political connections that make problems disappear. And you've been planning this revenge for how long? 2 years of active planning. I needed to understand your routines, your weaknesses, your psychological profile." She gestured around the bedroom. "I needed to figure out how to get close enough to destroy you without anyone suspecting who I really was." Lysander felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. "The Harrington brothers. Did you?" "I didn't arrange their bet, but I knew about their gambling debts and their desperation. When Marcus told me what he'd overheard at the museum, I realized the universe had handed me the perfect opportunity. So everything tonight, the wedding, this conversation, it's all part of your plan?" "Not everything." Evangeline's voice softened slightly. "I didn't expect you to sit down in that alley. I didn't expect you to speak to me like I was human rather than a problem to solve." The admission hung between them. Lysander studied her face, searching for deception, but finding something that looked like genuine confusion. What exactly do you want from me? I want you to understand what your family took from me. Evangeline moved closer, close enough that he could smell the faint lavender scent of her shampoo. I want you to know what it feels like to lose everything that matters. And how do you plan to accomplish that? By making you care about someone you're destined to lose. The words hit him like a punch to the chest. Lysander realized that somewhere between the alley and this moment, he'd begun to see her as more than just a solution to his bet. The woman standing before him was intelligent, damaged, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with her appearance and everything to do with her fierce determination to survive. You think I'll fall in love with you? I think you're lonely enough to try. The accusation stung because it was true. Lysander had spent years building sterling real estate into a powerhouse, but somewhere along the way he'd stopped building relationships with actual people. His social circle consisted of business associates and acquaintances who wanted something from him. And what about you? He asked. What happens when you start caring about the man you're supposed to destroy? Evangeline's composure cracked slightly. That won't happen. Are you sure? Because for someone who's supposed to hate me, you're doing a good job of looking conflicted. She turned away, but not before he caught the uncertainty in her eyes. Here's what's going to happen, Lysander said, making a decision that surprised even him. We're going to honor our agreement. 1 year of marriage, public appearances, the whole performance. Why would you do that? You know what I am now. Because I want to know the truth about my father. Because I want to understand what really happened 5 years ago. He paused. And because walking away now would mean I lose the bet and my company anyway. Evangeline faced him again. You're willing to live with someone who wants to destroy your family. I'm willing to live with someone who might be the only person honest enough to show me who my family really is. They stood in silence for several moments, each calculating the implications of this new arrangement. Finally, Evangeline spoke. Ground rules. We maintain the public marriage, but privately, we're adversaries. Agreed. But I have conditions too. Such as, you don't lie to me anymore. Whatever game we're playing, we play it honestly. And if I discover evidence that could send your father to prison, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Evangeline extended her hand. Partners in mutual destruction? Lysander shook it, feeling the same jolt of electricity he'd experienced in the alley. May the best player win. As they prepared for bed on opposite sides of the room, both knew that the real game was just beginning. 3 weeks into their strange marriage, Lysander discovered that living with Evangeline Fairchild was like sharing a house with a beautiful, intelligent bomb that could explode at any moment. She had settled into the Sterling mansion with an ease that unnerved him. Within days, she'd memorized the staff schedules, learned Mrs. Chin's preferences for household management, and somehow convinced the groundskeeper to let her help with the garden. To anyone watching, she appeared to be adjusting to her new life with remarkable grace. But Lysander caught the moments when her mask slipped. Like when she automatically reached for the light switch in the library without looking, suggesting she'd been in the room before. Or when she mentioned that the roses in the East Garden used to be white instead of red, then quickly changed the subject when he asked how she knew that. This morning, he found her in his study at dawn, sitting behind his desk with financial reports spread across the mahogany surface. Interesting reading? He asked from the doorway. Evangeline looked up without any trace of guilt. Your quarterly projections are conservative. The downtown development project could yield 30% higher returns if you adjusted the commercial to residential ratio. How would you know that? I have an MBA from Wharton. She set down the report. Did you think I spent 5 years learning to beg for change on street corners? Lysander entered the study, noting how natural she looked in his chair. What else haven't you told me about your qualifications? I specialized in real estate development and urban planning. Graduated summa cum laude. Her smile was sharp. Daddy wanted me to take over the family business eventually. The pain that flickered across her face when she mentioned her father was quickly suppressed, but Lysander caught it. He was beginning to recognize the tells that indicated when something genuinely hurt her versus when she was performing. Where did you go after you escaped? Boston first, then New York. I worked for Meridian Properties under an assumed name for 2 years. She gestured at the reports. I learned how your industry really works. The backroom deals, the political favors, the ways to make problems disappear. And now you're using that knowledge against me. I'm using it to understand you. Evangeline stood, moving around the desk to face him. Do you know where you were the night I was kidnapped? The question caught him off guard. What? September 15th, 5 years ago. Where were you? Lysander thought back, trying to remember. I was finishing my master's degree at Oxford. I didn't return to Charleston until December that year. You were in England when it happened. Yes. Something in her expression shifted, became less certain. You didn't know about the kidnapping until after it was over. I didn't know about any kidnapping. I thought you died in a car accident. Evangeline moved to the window, her back to him. Your father called it an unfortunate tragedy. Said he felt terrible that business disagreements with my father had prevented our families from reconciling before my death. You think he was lying? I know he was lying. She turned back to him. But you weren't part of it. The admission seemed to cost her something. Lysander realized that some part of her revenge fantasy had included him being complicit in her disappearance. Learning that he'd been innocent complicated her narrative. Does that change anything? He asked. I don't know. Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Chun announcing that they had visitors. Octavius and Cassius Harrington stood in the foyer, both trying to appear casual but clearly fishing for information. Lysander, Octavius said, embracing him with false warmth. We wanted to check on how married life is treating you. Wonderfully, Lysander replied, his arm sliding around Evangeline's waist with practiced ease. Have you met my wife properly? Eva, these are the gentlemen responsible for our romantic beginning. Evangeline smiled with perfect sweetness. How thoughtful of you to bring us together. But Cassius was studying her with uncomfortable intensity. You look familiar. Have we met before? I don't think so, Evangeline said. I'm not exactly part of your social circle. Maybe it's your voice, Octavius mused. There's something about it. Lysander felt Evangeline tense beside him. Eva has one of those faces. People always think they know her from somewhere. The brothers stayed for coffee, making small talk that felt increasingly strained. After they left, Evangeline disappeared into the garden while Lysander went to his office. That evening, they attended a charity gala at the Charleston Place Hotel. It was their first major public appearance as a married couple, and Lysander was surprised by how easily they fell into the roles of devoted newlyweds. Evangeline wore a midnight blue dress that transformed her from the conservative wife she played at home into something that stopped conversations when she entered the room. She moved through Charleston's elite with confidence, charming donors and deflecting personal questions with skill that suggested this wasn't her first time navigating high society. Your wife is remarkable, commented Margaret Thornfield, a prominent socialite who'd known Lysander since childhood. Where did you say you met? It was rather unconventional, Lysander said, his hand finding the small of Evangeline's back. Sometimes the best things happen when you least expect them. Later, during the dancing portion of the evening, Lysander led Evangeline onto the floor for a waltz. She followed his lead perfectly, as if they'd been dancing together for years. You're full of surprises, he murmured as they turned. Cotillion classes. My mother insisted on proper social training. Your mother? Tell me about her. Evangeline's step faltered slightly. She died when I was 16. Cancer. I'm sorry. She would have liked this dress. Evangeline's voice was softer than usual. She always said a woman should own at least one dress that made her feel like she could conquer the world. Mission accomplished. When she looked up at him, Lysander saw something unguarded in her expression. For just a moment, she wasn't the woman plotting his family's destruction. She was simply Evangeline, beautiful and sad, and trying to pretend she wasn't enjoying herself. This is dangerous, she said quietly. What is? This? Us? The way you're looking at me. How am I looking at you? Like you're forgetting who I really am. Lysander spun her in a slow circle, pulling her closer when she returned to his arms. Maybe I'm seeing who you really are for the first time. Don't. Her voice carried a warning. Don't make this more complicated than it already is. Too late. The song ended, but they remained on the dance floor for several heartbeats longer than necessary. Finally, Evangeline stepped back, her professional smile returning. We should mingle, she said. People are watching. As they moved through the crowd, Lysander noticed Cassius Harrington making phone calls in the hotel lobby. Something about his manner suggested the calls weren't social. Back at home that night, they prepared for bed with the careful choreography they'd developed over 3 weeks of sharing space. Lysander changed in the bathroom while Evangeline used the bedroom, then they switched. When he emerged, She was sitting at the vanity in her nightgown, brushing her hair. The simple domestic scene hit him with unexpected force. Evangeline. She met his eyes in the mirror. Whatever my father did to you, whatever my family is guilty of, I want you to know that I'll help you find the truth. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. And because... He hesitated, then decided on honesty. Because I'm starting to care about what happens to you. Evangeline set down her brush and turned to face him. Lysander, you can't. Can't what? Can't care about my own wife. Can't make this real when we both know how it has to end. They stared at each other across the bedroom, both acknowledging the growing tension that had nothing to do with revenge and everything to do with the fact that they were two people who were supposed to be enemies, but were instead becoming something much more complicated. Get some sleep, Evangeline said finally. Tomorrow we have the hospital fundraiser, and I need to play the perfect wife again. As Lysander settled onto the sitting room couch, he realized that the line between performance and reality was blurring more each day. The question was whether either of them would survive when it disappeared completely. The Sterling family dinner happened every Sunday at precisely 7 o'clock, a tradition Vivian Sterling had maintained for 32 years of marriage. Tonight marked Evangeline's fourth attendance, and she'd been dreading it since Monday. Ambrose Sterling sat at the head of the mahogany dining table like a king holding court, his silver hair perfectly styled and his suit immaculate despite being at home. At 68, he still commanded attention when he entered a room, though Evangeline noticed the slight tremor in his left hand that he tried to hide. Eva, dear, Vivian said, passing a crystal bowl of roasted vegetables. Lysander tells me you've been helping with the downtown development project. Just reviewing some reports, Evangeline replied carefully. I have some background in real estate. Ambrose's fork paused halfway to his mouth. What kind of background? I worked for a development company in New York for a few years. Which company? Evangeline felt the trap closing, but had no choice except to continue. Meridian Properties. Meridian. Ambrose set down his fork entirely. James Rothschild's outfit. They handle primarily commercial waterfront developments. Yes. Interesting specialty. Very niche market. His eyes never left her face. Most people wouldn't know enough about waterfront zoning laws to make the recommendations Lysander mentioned. Evangeline realized her mistake too late. She'd gotten comfortable over the past month, letting small pieces of her real knowledge slip through. Ambrose Sterling hadn't built his empire by missing details. I'm a quick learner, she said. Indeed. Ambrose reached for his wine glass. Tell me, what's your opinion on the Harbor District rezoning proposal from 2019? The question was a landmine. The Harbor District proposal had been a massive controversy 5 years ago, involving the exact waterfront properties her father had refused to sell. Only someone deeply involved in Charleston real estate would know the specific details. I'm not familiar with that particular case, Evangeline lied. Really? Because the zoning changes would have directly impacted the methodology you suggested for our current project. Ambrose's smile was sharp. The residential density calculations you recommended match exactly the numbers proposed by Fairchild Development before they withdrew from the market. Silence descended over the dining room. Vivian looked confused, while Lysander had gone completely still. Evangeline felt her heart hammering against her ribs. Coincidence, she managed. I don't believe in coincidences. Ambrose stood slowly. Especially not when they involve dead women who apparently have extensive knowledge of my business practices. Ambrose, Vivian said sharply, what are you talking about? Why don't you ask your daughter-in-law? Ambrose moved around the table toward Evangeline. Or should I say, why don't you ask Evangeline Fairchild? Vivian's wine glass shattered against the floor. Lysander was on his feet instantly, positioning himself between his father and Evangeline. That's enough. Enough. Ambrose laughed, but the sound held no humor. My son has married the daughter of my greatest enemy, a woman who should be dead, and you think it's enough? She is dead, Vivian whispered, her face white. I went to her memorial service. I sent flowers to the family. Apparently, reports of her death were greatly exaggerated. Ambrose's eyes never left Evangeline. The question is, what does she want? Money? Revenge? Or is she working for someone else? Evangeline stood slowly, abandoning any pretense. I want justice for what you did to my family. What I did. Ambrose's voice rose. Your father was an idealistic fool who put sentiment above business sense. I offered him fair market value for properties that were losing money. You offered him 30% below market value and threatened to destroy his reputation when he refused. Business is business. Kidnapping isn't business, Evangeline shot back. Human trafficking isn't business. The accusation hung in the air like a live wire. Vivian made a choking sound. You're delusional, Ambrose said, but Evangeline caught the flicker of something in his eyes. Fear. Am I? Should we call Detective Martinez from Charleston PD? I'm sure she'd love to discuss the shell company that paid for my kidnapping. Coastal Solutions LLC, registered to a P.O. box that traces back to Sterling Real Estate's legal department. Ambrose's face had gone gray. You can't prove anything. Can't I? Evangeline pulled out her phone. I've spent 3 years documenting every connection, every money trail, every witness who can place your people at the scene. Ambrose, Vivian's voice was barely a whisper. Tell me she's lying. The silence stretched unbearably. Finally, Ambrose straightened his tie, his composure returning like armor sliding into place. Vivian, take Lysander and go upstairs. No, Lysander said firmly. We're finishing this conversation. This isn't a conversation. This is a family matter that requires immediate resolution. The threat was unmistakable. Evangeline felt ice form in her stomach as she realized that Ambrose Sterling was exactly as dangerous as she'd always believed. If anything happens to me, she said quietly, evidence packages go to the FBI, the State Attorney General, and 3 different newspapers. Nothing's going to happen to you, Ambrose replied with chilling calm. You're going to disappear again. Quietly this time. Permanently. Over my dead body, Lysander said. That can be arranged too. The casual way he threatened his own son's life told Evangeline everything she needed to know about Ambrose Sterling's priorities. Family meant nothing when it conflicted with business. Vivian suddenly stood, her chair scraping against the floor. Get out. Everyone turned to stare at her. I said get out, she repeated, her voice stronger. Ambrose, leave this house immediately. This is my house, Vivian. This is our house, and I'm telling you to leave before I call the police myself. Ambrose studied his wife with the same cold calculation he'd used on Evangeline. You don't know what you're doing. I know exactly what I'm doing. Vivian moved to stand beside Evangeline. I'm protecting an innocent woman from a monster I apparently married. She's not innocent. She's a threat to everything we've built. Everything you've built on blood and suffering, Vivian shot back. Did you think I was completely blind? Did you think I never wondered why the Fairchild family lost everything so conveniently? Why competitors kept having accidents or scandals at precisely the right moments? Ambrose's mask finally slipped, revealing the cold fury beneath. Those people were obstacles. Business obstacles. Those people were human beings with families who loved them. Sentiment is weakness, Vivian. I taught our son that lesson. Apparently not well enough. He turned and walked toward the door, but paused at the threshold. The annual Children's Hospital Gala was Charleston's most prestigious social event, held in the grand ballroom of the Francis Marion Hotel. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over 500 of the city's most influential residents, all dressed in their finest evening wear and competing to demonstrate their charitable generosity. Evangeline stood beside Lysander near the auction display, wearing an emerald green gown that Vivian had insisted on purchasing for her. The older woman had spent the past week acting as both ally and protective mother figure, a development that had surprised everyone, including herself. The Rothschild painting is expected to go for $200,000, Lysander murmured, his hand resting possessively on the small of Evangeline's back. Want to make a bid? With what money? Evangeline smiled, but her attention was focused on the crowd. She'd spotted Ambrose across the room, flanked by 2 men she didn't recognize. He hadn't spoken to his family since the confrontation at dinner 3 days ago, but his presence tonight felt ominous. I have money, Lysander said. More than enough for whatever you want. The casual way he included her in his wealth should have felt like a victory. Instead, it made her stomach tighten with something that felt dangerously like guilt. There's something I need to tell you, she began, but was interrupted by applause as the evening's host took the stage. Mayor Patricia Wells commanded attention in her navy blue suit, her silver hair perfectly styled and her smile practiced from years of public service. Welcome, everyone, to our 25th Annual Children's Hospital Gala. Before we begin the auction, I'd like to recognize some special guests. Evangeline felt Lysander tense beside her as the mayor continued with acknowledgments. Something was wrong, but she couldn't identify what. We're also honored to have with us tonight some of Charleston's most prominent business families, including the Sterlings, who've been generous supporters of children's health care for 3 decades. Polite applause rippled through the crowd. Evangeline noticed that Octavius and Cassius Harrington were positioned near the stage, both watching her with predatory intensity. In fact, Mayor Wells continued, I understand we have some exciting news to share about the Sterling family. Lysander, would you and your lovely wife join me on stage? Evangeline's blood turned to ice. This wasn't part of the planned program. We should go, Lysander said quietly, but she could hear the uncertainty in his voice. They made their way through the crowd toward the stage, Evangeline's heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. As they climbed the steps, she caught sight of Cassius Harrington speaking urgently into his phone. Ladies and gentlemen, Mayor Wells announced, I'm delighted to introduce Mr. and Mrs. Lysander Sterling, newlyweds who've captured Charleston's romantic imagination with their whirlwind courtship. More applause, but Evangeline could feel the energy in the room shifting. Too many people were watching with the kind of attention that suggested they were waiting for something specific to happen. Mrs. Sterling, the mayor continued, I understand you have quite an interesting background. Would you like to share with everyone how you and Lysander met? The question was innocuous enough, but Evangeline noticed that several reporters had appeared near the stage, cameras ready. This was a setup. It was very romantic, she said into the microphone, falling back on the story they'd practiced. Sometimes love finds you when you least expect it. Indeed it does, said a voice from the audience. Octavius Harrington stepped forward, holding what appeared to be a folder of documents. Though I think our guest would be interested in the full story of how love found Mrs. Sterling. Lysander moved protectively closer to Evangeline. Octavius, what are you doing? I'm sharing some fascinating information with our friends. Octavius opened the folder with theatrical flourish. It seems Mrs. Eva Sterling has been quite modest about her background. The ballroom had gone completely quiet. Even the wait staff had stopped moving. According to my research, Octavius continued, Mrs. Sterling is actually Miss Evangeline Fairchild, daughter of the late Theodore Fairchild, who died under mysterious circumstances 5 years ago after his business empire collapsed overnight. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Evangeline felt the walls closing in but forced herself to remain calm. More interesting still, Octavius said, his voice carrying easily in the silent ballroom. Miss Fairchild was presumed dead in a car accident shortly after her father's death. Yet here she stands, very much alive, married to the son of the man who destroyed her family. The explosion of voices was immediate and overwhelming. Reporters surged forward, cameras flashing, while socialites whispered frantically among themselves. Evangeline felt exposed and vulnerable under the bright stage lights. That's enough, Lysander said into his microphone, his voice cutting through the chaos. This is neither the time nor the place for, oh, but it is the perfect place, interrupted another voice. Ambrose Sterling had appeared on stage, flanked by his 2 companions who were clearly security personnel. It's time Charleston knew exactly who they've been welcoming into their homes. Vivian rushed onto the stage from the opposite side, her face pale but determined. Ambrose, stop this immediately. Stop what? Telling the truth? Ambrose faced the crowd. My son has been deceived by a woman seeking revenge against our family. A woman who's been planning this charade for years. You're right, Evangeline said suddenly, her voice clear and strong through the microphone. The admission silenced the crowd. I am Evangeline Fairchild. I did plan this marriage. And everything else Ambrose Sterling just said is absolutely true. Lysander stared at her in shock, but she continued. What he didn't mention is why I planned it. He didn't tell you that 5 years ago, when my father refused to sell him our family's waterfront properties, Ambrose Sterling had me kidnapped and sold to human traffickers. The silence was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in the vast ballroom. He didn't mention that my father died of a heart attack 3 days after I disappeared, or that my family's properties were acquired by Sterling Real Estate through foreclosure proceedings that began before my father was even buried. Ambrose stepped toward her, his face twisted with rage. You lying little don't. Lysander moved between them, his voice deadly quiet. Don't take another step toward my wife. Your wife is a con artist and a criminal. My wife is a survivor of crimes you committed. Father and son faced each other on the stage while hundreds of Charleston's elite watched in stunned fascination. I did what was necessary for business, Ambrose said coldly. Just like my father did, and his father before him. Your grandfather was a land thief and a murderer, Vivian said suddenly, her voice carrying clearly through the microphone. And I have proof. She pulled a small key from her purse and held it up. After our dinner conversation, I remembered something. During renovations 15 years ago, workers found a hidden safe behind the library wall. I've kept the contents all these years, never knowing what they meant. Ambrose went completely still. Vivian, don't. The safe contained letters, deeds, and confessions written by your grandfather before he died. Documents that prove he murdered Theodore Fairchild's grandfather and forged land titles to steal the waterfront properties in 1943. The implications hit the crowd like a physical wave. Evangeline felt the world shift around her as pieces of family history clicked into place. The feud between our families didn't start with my father, she said, understanding flooding through her. It started with yours. 3 generations of theft and murder. Which ends tonight, Lysander said firmly. He turned to face the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for disrupting your evening. But sometimes the truth can't wait for a more convenient time. Ambrose made one last desperate attempt to regain control. He lunged toward Evangeline, his hand reaching inside his jacket. But Lysander was faster, catching his father's wrist and twisting until something metallic clattered to the stage floor. Security. Mayor Wells called, and hotel personnel rushed forward. As chaos erupted around them, Evangeline found herself pulled against Lysander's chest, his arms protective around her, while flashbulbs exploded and voices shouted questions. In that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of both their families' reputations, she realized that something fundamental had changed between them. Are you all right? He asked, his lips close to her ear. I think so. Good. Because we have a lot to figure out. As they were escorted off the stage by security, Evangeline caught sight of Vivian being interviewed by reporters, the mysterious key still clutched in her hand. For the first time in 5 years, Evangeline felt something that might have been hope. The truth was finally free. Now they had to survive the consequences. 6 months after the Charleston Hospital Gala scandal, Lysander Sterling stood in the FBI field office in downtown Charleston, watching his father being led away in handcuffs. The man who had once commanded respect from senators and CEOs now looked small and defeated, his expensive suit wrinkled and his silver hair disheveled. The federal charges include conspiracy, human trafficking, racketeering, and murder, Agent Sarah Chun explained to Lysander and Evangeline as they watched through the one-way glass. The evidence your mother provided, combined with Evangeline's documentation, gives us enough to put him away for life. Evangeline stood beside Lysander, her hand linked with his. Over the past months, their relationship had evolved from mutual antagonism to genuine partnership to something deeper that neither of them had expected. What about the Harrington brothers? Lysander asked. Octavius and Cassius are facing charges for extortion and conspiracy. Turns out they weren't just trying to embarrass you with that bet. They were working as informants for your father, feeding him information about potential threats to his business empire. The revelation had shocked Lysander, though it explained how Ambrose had learned about Evangeline's true identity so quickly. The brothers had been watching her for weeks, taking photographs and running background checks. Their gambling debts were real, Agent Chun continued, but your father was both their creditor and their solution. He promised to forgive their debts if they could compromise you in a way that would justify removing you from the family business. Because I was asking too many questions about his methods, Lysander said. Exactly. Your reputation for accepting impossible challenges made you the perfect target for their scheme. 3 hours later, they walked out of the federal building into the bright Carolina sunshine. Evangeline wore a simple blue dress and her wedding ring, the only piece of jewelry she'd kept from her time as Mrs. Lysander Sterling. Everything else had been returned or donated when they'd legally separated 2 months ago. So it's really over, she said as they reached Lysander's car. The criminal case is over. The civil litigation will take years. Lysander paused with his hand on the passenger door. There's something else we need to discuss. The properties. Your grandfather's land deeds were found in that safe along with everything else. The Fairchild waterfront properties legally belong to you. They were never legitimately sold to Sterling Real Estate. Evangeline had been dreading this conversation. The properties were worth $40 million in current market value, enough to restore her family's fortune and give her the independence she'd thought she wanted. And Sterling Real Estate. Bankrupt within 6 months unless I can find major investors. The legal fees alone will drain most of our liquid assets. Lysander's voice was matter of fact, but she could see the pain in his eyes. I'm going to lose everything my grandfather built. Not everything. They drove to the waterfront in silence, parking at the marina where Evangeline's grandfather had once operated a successful shipping business. The late afternoon sun turned the harbor golden, and sailboats dotted the horizon like white wings against the blue sky. I've been thinking, Evangeline said as they walked along the pier, about what comes next. And I don't want the properties back. Lysander stopped walking. What? I don't want to reclaim my grandfather's empire. I don't want to spend the rest of my life managing investments and attending board meetings and becoming the kind of person who destroys other families for profit. Then what do you want? Evangeline turned to face him, her heart hammering against her ribs. I want to build something new. Something that isn't tainted by 3 generations of greed and violence. With who? With you. If you're willing to walk away from everything you've inherited. The proposal hung between them like a bridge that could either connect their futures or collapse under the weight of impossibility. You're asking me to choose between my family legacy and you. I'm asking you to choose between the past and the future. Evangeline moved closer, close enough to see the gold flecks in his green eyes. I'm asking you to choose love over money. Lysander was quiet for a long moment, watching a fishing boat return to harbor. Finally, he spoke. 6 months ago, I would have said you were insane. My company, my reputation, my inheritance, those things were my identity. And now I realize that none of it means anything without someone to share it with. He reached for her hands. The morning after the gala, when you moved out of the mansion, I felt more lost than I'd ever felt in my life. Lysander, let me finish. I've spent the last 4 months trying to figure out how to save Sterling Real Estate, and I finally realized I was asking the wrong question. The right question is, what kind of life do I want to build? What kind of life do you want? One where I wake up next to you every morning. One where we create something together that we can be proud of. One where we break the cycle of corruption and greed that destroyed both our families. Evangeline felt tears forming in her eyes. That sounds like a good life. Is that a yes? Instead of answering with words, she kissed him. It was different from their awkward wedding kiss or the polite pecks they'd shared during their public appearances. This kiss was honest and passionate and full of promises about their future. When they separated, both were breathing hard. So what do we do first? Lysander asked. First, we get married again. Properly this time. I thought we were legally divorced. We are. But I want to marry you when it's our choice. Not because of a bet or revenge or any other reason except that we love each other. Lysander smiled, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in months. 1 year from our original wedding date. Full circle. 1 year later, the ceremony took place on a bluff overlooking Charleston Harbor, on land that had once belonged to Evangeline's great-grandfather and now belonged to the Fairchild Sterling Community Development Foundation. 50 guests sat in white chairs arranged in a semicircle, facing the water where 3 generations of family feuds had finally ended. Evangeline wore her grandmother's wedding dress, carefully preserved and altered to fit her perfectly. The silk had yellowed slightly with age, but the lace overlay was still beautiful, and wearing it felt like honoring the women who had come before her. Lysander waited at a simple wooden arch decorated with white roses and greenery from the mansion's garden. He wore a navy blue suit instead of the formal black he'd chosen for their first wedding, and his smile was radiant as she walked toward him. Vivian Sterling sat in the front row, her eyes bright with tears. She'd sold the mansion 6 months ago and used the proceeds to establish a foundation for victims of human trafficking. The work had given her purpose and helped her find redemption for the years she'd spent ignoring her husband's crimes. Judge Patricia Henley, the same woman who had performed their first ceremony, officiated again. But this time, her words carried weight and meaning instead of legal obligation. Do you, Lysander, take Evangeline to be your wife, to love and cherish, in prosperity and in struggle, for as long as you both shall live? I do. His voice was strong and certain. I choose you, Evangeline, today and every day for the rest of our lives. Do you, Evangeline, take Lysander to be your husband, to love and cherish, in prosperity and in struggle, for as long as you both shall live? I do. She looked directly into his eyes. I choose forgiveness over revenge. I choose love over hate. I choose you. This time, when they kissed, it felt like coming home. The reception was held in the garden of their new home, a restored Victorian cottage they'd purchased and renovated together. It was smaller than the Sterling mansion, but filled with warmth and laughter and the promise of the life they were building. As the sun set over Charleston Harbor, Lysander and Evangeline danced to the same waltz they'd shared at the charity gala almost 2 years earlier. But now there were no masks, no performances, no hidden agendas. Just two people who had found each other despite everything that should have kept them apart. No regrets? Lysander asked as he spun her in a slow circle. None, Evangeline said firmly. You? Only that it took us so long to get here. We needed the journey, the pain, the mistakes, the almost losing each other. It all led us to this moment. Mrs. Fairchild Sterling. Mr. Fairchild Sterling. They'd both legally changed their names, combining their family legacies into something new. Their foundation had already broken ground on 3 affordable housing developments and a community center for at-risk youth. They were building the kind of empire that lifted people up instead of tearing them down. As the last song ended and their guests began to leave, Evangeline and Lysander stood together on their front porch, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. I love you, Lysander said, his arms wrapped around her from behind. I love you too. Evangeline leaned back against his chest. Thank you for choosing me. Thank you for choosing forgiveness. They stood in comfortable silence, two souls who had found each other across the wreckage of family feuds and personal vendettas. They had lost fortunes and gained something infinitely more valuable, a love that had survived the worst that life could throw at them and emerged stronger on the other side. Tomorrow they would continue building their new life together. Tonight, they were simply and completely happy. The morning sun streamed through the windows of the Fairchild Sterling Community Center, illuminating the faces of 30 children seated cross-legged on the gymnasium floor. Evangeline sat in front of them, holding a picture book about a little girl who refused to give up on her dreams despite seemingly impossible obstacles. And what do we learn from Maria's story? She asked the group of 6- and 7-year-olds. A boy named Marcus raised his hand eagerly. That even when bad things happen, we can still make good things happen too. Exactly right. Evangeline smiled, remembering another Marcus who had helped her years ago when she lived on the streets. This Marcus was part of their after-school program, a bright kid whose single mother worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. Sometimes the hardest challenges teach us how strong we really are. Mrs. Evangeline called out a girl named Sophia. Will you read us another story tomorrow? I'll be here every Tuesday, just like always. As the children dispersed to their various activities, Evangeline felt a familiar pair of arms wrap around her waist from behind. How did story time go? Lysander asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Wonderful. These kids never fail to amaze me with their resilience. She turned in his arms, noting the paint smudges on his shirt. How's the mural coming along? The teenagers are incredibly talented. You should see what they're creating on the east wall. His eyes sparkled with the same enthusiasm he'd once reserved for real estate deals. Maria designed a section that tells the story of Charleston through the eyes of kids from different generations. 3 years ago, they'd opened their first community center in the neighborhood where Evangeline had once pretended to be homeless. The building sat on land that had originally belonged to her great-grandfather, and now it served families who needed safe spaces for their children and resources for building better lives. Speaking of stories, Lysander said, his voice taking on a more serious tone, I got a call from my mother this morning. How is she? Good. Really good, actually. The trafficking survivor support group she started in Atlanta just received a major federal grant. Vivian had moved to Georgia 2 years ago to be closer to her sister, but she called every week and visited for holidays. She wanted to know if we've made any decisions about her offer. Evangeline's hand moved instinctively to her stomach, where a tiny life was just beginning to grow. They'd only confirmed the pregnancy yesterday, and they hadn't told anyone yet. About the house in Savannah? About being grandparents? Evangeline's eyes widened. How did she know? Apparently mothers have supernatural intuition about these things. Plus, she noticed you didn't drink wine at dinner last week. They walked hand in hand toward Lysander's office, past walls covered with photos of community events, scholarship recipients, and families who had found new beginnings through their programs. The Fairchild Sterling Foundation now operated in 4 cities and had helped hundreds of families transition out of poverty. Are you nervous? Lysander asked as they settled onto the couch in his office. Terrified, Evangeline admitted. What if we mess this up? What if we repeat our family's mistakes? We won't. His voice carried absolute certainty. We'll make different choices because we've learned from their mistakes. We'll love our children unconditionally, support their dreams even when we don't understand them, and teach them that true strength comes from lifting others up. Promise. I promise. Lysander placed his hand over hers on her stomach. This baby is going to grow up knowing that love is the most powerful force in the world. That forgiveness can heal the deepest wounds. That 2 people who choose each other every day can overcome anything. Evangeline leaned against his shoulder, watching through the window as children played in the courtyard they designed together. A group of boys was building something elaborate with blocks, while girls nearby worked on a garden project. All of them laughing, creating, dreaming of futures filled with possibility. Do you ever miss it? She asked. The old life, the money, the power? Never. Lysander's response was immediate and sincere. I've never felt richer than I do right now. Even though we drive a 10-year-old Honda instead of a Mercedes? Even though we eat takeout twice a week because we're too tired to cook? Even though our biggest luxury is date night at the neighborhood pizza place? Especially because of all those things. He tilted her chin up so he could look into her eyes. We built this life together, Evangeline. Every choice, every sacrifice, every moment of happiness. We created it from nothing but love and determination. As evening approached, they locked up the community center and drove home to their cottage, now filled with comfortable furniture, bookshelves overflowing with novels and photo albums, and walls covered with artwork from the children they served. Over dinner, they talked about baby names and college funds and whether they'd need a bigger house. They discussed the new scholarship program for children aging out of foster care and the job training center they hoped to open next year. Later, as they prepared for bed, Evangeline caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at her bore little resemblance to the angry, broken girl who had plotted revenge in dark alleys. This woman's eyes held peace and purpose. Her smile was genuine. Her heart was full. I love our life, she said as they settled into bed together. So do I. Lysander pulled her close, his hand resting protectively over the child they'd created together. I love that we turned our pain into purpose. I love that we chose healing over hatred. I love that we're going to raise a baby who will never know the fear and anger that shaped us. Outside their bedroom window, Charleston Harbor sparkled in the moonlight, its waters no longer holding the ghosts of family feuds and old wounds. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to make a difference in their community. But tonight, Evangeline and Lysander Sterling Fairchild fell asleep in each other's arms, grateful for the journey that had brought them to this moment of perfect contentment. They had learned that the greatest victory wasn't in destroying your enemies, but in transforming them into allies. The greatest fortune wasn't measured in dollars, but in the love of someone who chose you every single day. Their story had begun with a dangerous bet and a desire for revenge. It would continue with a child who would grow up knowing that love really could conquer all.